Welcome back to LogiSYM Digital 2020. It's now 2:30 p.m. in Singapore, and in Germany it's 8:30 a.m. in the morning, and that's where our next presenter is based. David Strauss is the Global Director, Strategic Partner Development at E2 Open. And David will be talking about another hot topic, supply chain collaboration. The title of his presentation is Internal and External Collaboration Across Supply Chain Networks. So David, good morning to you in Germany, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Good afternoon to you in Singapore. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present here. It's actually quite a coincidence, or maybe serendipity, that just a little over a year ago, colleagues of mine were in Singapore. So we can't be there in person because of the current situation, but my colleagues were there a year ago to accept an award jointly with our valued customer Infineon, the semiconductor manufacturer, and it was a technology collaboration award. So I thought, great coincidence that we are back together here on this topic, albeit virtually. So I'm here to talk about collaboration, and let's go back to basics. Always go back to the roots, to the definition. The words collaboration comes from the Latin com, with, and laborare, to work. If we look at the dictionary definition, where it says the action of working with someone, interestingly enough, in the dictionary, you get this added notion of to produce something, and that's what supply chain is all about. So very appropriate. The reason why this topic is relevant always in supply chain is that the word collaboration means a million things in supply chain, a multitude of different things. It's a very overused term. So the main part of today's talk is about taking you through the multiple different places where this concept of collaboration is used across the supply chain, give everybody a bit of a end-to-end map of what's going on out there, what is happening in real life. So let's look at the typical, atypical, generic supply chain. We have our demand on the left-hand side, retail distribution or other channels to market, customs, logistics, the ways to get the goods towards the consumer and across the supply chain. You have packing, manufacturing, and raw materials all the way to the right-hand side and components. Now let's drill into various parts of the supply chain and look at what kind of collaboration happens in these supply chain networks today. So first, in the upstream, to the right-hand side, this is, in our experience, very much a focus area in high tech. People fighting for the latest 20 nanometer chips. So there are constrained supplies in the upstream. Industrial manufacturing has the same thing, made to order, long lead time, hard to find items. You talk about batteries, rare earths, and things like that, as well as industrial engineering, things like that. And it is the collaboration often between the supplier of raw material, supplier of components, of semi-finished goods, with the next manufacturing downstep who is procuring the materials they need to produce. And the supplier collaboration models, already here, we're looking at one of the oldest and most widely permeated place where collaboration happens. Even there's already multiple models which you see out there in the wild. So the classic, which most of the audience here on the call will know, is the procure to pay, P2P. So I order something, it gets shipped, I pay it. It's that simple. Then next level, if I want to go a little bit further than just sending out orders, you come to the concepts of source to settle. You hear that a lot more in the last years. There you're looking at auditing your suppliers. You're looking for certifications. You have blankets orders to ensure that your framework agreements are bilaterally correctly implemented and respected. And then the holy grail, which people have been trying to do for well over 20 years, vendor managed inventory. So here I'm sharing not just individual orders, repetitive chains of orders. I, as the consumer, I'm sharing my forecast. This is my plan. This is what I would like to do. And the supplier shares back his commit. This is the result of my production planning. This is what I'm going to ship to you. These models, as we go through this evolution from the simple, just order and response, out to source to settle, out to VMI, are progressively harder to do in a manual fashion. Orders, you can still fax. Forecasts, reliably emailing or faxing those every week, that's not the way to run a VMI, especially if you're doing it at scale. 1 or 2 suppliers, maybe 100, it's not going to happen. The models progressively add more value. You have automation, or options for automation if you start doing procure to pay electronically. You get closed loop processes. You have an order, but you'll actually get a response. You get a confirmation. Once you get into source to settle, you have more control, more quality control. You have control over the ethical nature of the sustainability of your suppliers. And in the VMI, you're basically doing collaborative planning, so you get a lot of efficiency across the supply chain. Next, let's drill into the downstream. So the left-hand side, what's happening down on the left-hand side of a typical template supply chain. The industries where there's a heavy focus, again, in our practical experience, consumer packaged goods is all about very consumer focused, anything around retail, either direct or indirect distribution. The apparel industry is focused fair and square on the downstream retail distribution angle. Consumer technology, not to be underestimated, very competitive. The latest buzz, the latest sexy technology is very competitive market. And it's the collaboration between, we'll call it the broad supply chain functions, sometimes called fulfillment, logistics, and the demand and the channel. What are the models we see here in practice in the wild? They mirror very much what we see on the upstream. So it's no longer procure to pay, it's order to cash. So it's the consumer and the channel ordering from whoever is supplying to them. It's literally the mirror image of procure to pay. If you look at your customer, they're looking at you as the supplier and saying, I'm doing procure to pay with you, you're doing order to cash with me. And you have multiple different models. I'll just put an umbrella over the top of them. Collaborative planning, forecasting, replenishment, CPFR. That is, broadly speaking, the mirror image of VMI, of vendor managed inventory. Your demand is no longer being ordered item by item by item in a repetitive process. You're exchanging forecasts and planning across the network. And we can go deeper. If you're in multi-tier, omni-channel distribution networks, you wind up with this kind of picture. We see this in the wild every day, where companies across multi-tier networks are trying to align complex data sets like this. So this is where I started. I've got my sell-in, I've got my sell-out, but there's cross transfers happening. People are returning. There are returns to me, there are returns to my distributor, and at the end, I've got to close my books. That's quite a challenge. Same as in the upstream, the models are progressively harder to do at scale, right? Just handling orders manually with my customers, I can probably do that with a good call center and a good CSR team. If I try to do this at scale across, let's say, the entire Southeast Asia and thousands or 10,000s of distributors, I'm not going to be able to do that manually. But the models do provide more control, more efficiency. So there's always a natural pair, a curve. The more mature I am, the more value I get, but the harder it is to do manually. So I'm going towards digital. Just before the break, somebody encouraged again, don't forget your digital transformation in this current situation, because that is your path to value, your path to evolution and growth. in every collaboration, the ones that I've described, whether it's upstream or downstream, and I've got a couple more coming, you have the same problems. I saw somebody on the comments just for the start saying, hey, we're still an analog company, but very interested to see this. We know this. Many industries, many regions are still very, very manual. So the collaboration processes, which I described, run via email, phone call, faxes in some case. Excel's the most powerful software development tool in the world, Microsoft Excel. But you run into the problems of scaling. You run into the problems of data latency. So the data is slow and late. You run into data that is inaccurate. And that means that the processes stay fragmented. So you have little items of automation, little items of data, islands of data quality. But if you want to do decisions across the network, across the multiple layers of our supply chain, getting decision grade data is very hard. Am I looking at the right item? Am I looking at the right location? Am I even looking at the right time zone? What does 2:30 mean? Is it Singapore time or Germany time? And all of this drives up, this manual nature drives up your operating cost because you're scrambling to catch up, drives up inventory costs, and you miss out on revenue because you just often don't have what you need to serve your customer base. And this permeates everywhere, and this is where digital supply chain, digital transformations come in. Couple more examples just of where collaboration happens outside of just buying and selling. Logistics. Of course, logistics is present everywhere in the supply chain. At every industry, there is no industry, at least, which has a supply chain that doesn't ship materials, and it happens at every tier. The success of Singapore is founded on its strategic location as a port. You could say it's founded on logistics. And you wind up with networks like this. This is an easy one. It's easy for people to understand the network nature of a supply chain when they think of logistics, because there you can really literally draw it on a map like I've seen here, like I've done here. Multi-tier, multi-leg, multi-mode, multi-continent, consolidation, deconsolidation, the most complex network of all. Each of these individual legs is potentially an own transport order. So it's not a purchase order or a sales order, but it's a transport order, has its own life cycle, has its own challenges, and its own collaboration opportunities. I'll say that if you look at it on a global, on a planetary scale, logistics is probably the most communicative ecosystem across the board compared to the other ones, upstream, downstream, which we've looked at so far. In fact, because it's so communicative, E2Open has taken a step less than a week ago, or just about a week ago, of introducing in-transit visibility, we call it visibility for all, to our existing clients at no cost. Right? There's no incremental cost for our existing clients to get in-transit visibility against networks like this. Why were we able to do it? Because this is a communicative ecosystem. We know from experience that it is possible to get that in-transit data in digital form, put it all together and expose it to a customer with a manageable effort at speed. But logistics is definitely further ahead because it's network by nature. And then if we go rather than horizontal, if we go really vertical, drill down, and the most advanced part of collaboration is in fact the one which we got the prize for last year. It's manufacturing collaboration. So here you're drilling down into an outsourced manufacturing, in this case semiconductors, but valid for almost all other industries. And there you're no longer even connecting to ERP systems or transport management systems. You're down on MES, manufacturing execution systems, which literally control the machines on the shop floor. You're connecting directly to the quality management systems, which do quality measurements at every step. I don't know the exact figures, but in the case of Infineon, going across the entire multi-step production chain with lot traceability, batches, instruction, and tests, you're looking anywhere between tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of signals per day. which you are collaborating on, right? Literally tens of thousands of signals per day. I have started this batch, I'm coming to this one, etc. So there's always more complexity to be found, and there's always something which you could be doing better. There's always opportunity for improvement. Now, let's go back to the beginning and take us home in the time allowed. I know that Raymond is very strict on time. The title of this talk is Internal and External Collaboration. So ask yourself, on the diagram, who was the brand owner? What of what I described was an internal collaboration? What was external? The answer is, it doesn't matter, right? Any of these functions, with the exception of actual consumption, can be insourced at the brand owner, fully owned by their staff. Any of these functions can be outsourced to a third party, whether it's logistics, customs broker, co-packer, a CMO, co-manufacturer, raw material, semi-finished goods. And the ownership of a function may change. You might buy a company which has a different model of yours. You might carve out a certain part of your business and take it outside of your four walls. You might decide to do business process outsourcing to one of the providers. You're going through a supply chain transformation, so be ready for change. Always treat your supply chain network because it is a network. If you treat it as a series of silos, which is the default setting, every single person, every single organization who will be saying, this is my company, I have my business, I have my priorities, and will optimize their silo, push the problems upstream and downstream. Even when it's inside your four walls, like a business unit or a business function, logistics will be trying to optimize on-time delivery, whereas supply management will be trying to optimize on time in full. So these silos, even though they work for the same companies, will actually be pushing and pulling and fighting with each other. What you need to do, and that's where collaboration comes in, is align. Don't think of my priorities, think always my service enables the objective of my upstream partner. I, as the upstream partner, should behave in a way that enables my downstream partner to enable whatever service they're providing for me. So that's the difference between collaboration and just a series of silos, that you're aligning the information, the data, but especially the objectives and the behaviors, right? This trend to go to network is not just, don't take my word for it. Look at the analysts. If you look in less than 1.5 years, well, just over 1.5 years, we're seeing more and more new quadrants, right? These multi-enterprise quadrants from IDC or from Gartner's, they didn't exist 5 years ago. Control towers, multi-enterprise inventory optimization. So the analysts who monitor the digital evolution are saying exactly the same thing. Think network, think multi-enterprise, because it is a network anyway. Conclusions, some conclusions. Collaboration occurs in all functions of the supply chain, even if you don't see it, even if you don't label it collaboration. People are talking, people are mailing, people are phoning. Collaborations occurs in all tiers of the supply chain, downstream, midstream, upstream, packaging, planning. Collaboration will occur inside your four walls as well as outside, towards the outside of your four walls. The trend is one of change. So whether it's inside or outside, is something which is not rigid and static. It's something that evolves. The trend is towards outsourcing, not always. And maybe the current situation will do more nearshoring, more insourcing, and then in 10 years, we'll outsource it all again. There's absolutely value in advanced collaboration models in the right place at the right time. It's not easy, but if you get it right, the value, the business case is absolutely there. And it gets harder to scale in a manual mode. So think digital transformation. Once you've achieved this transparency and discipline in a digital collaboration, that data is available for reuse across all the tiers, horizontal tiers and across all the functions. So you can reuse it for planning, and solutions exist. So you have dashboards like this, which combine shipments, inventory, boats, trucks, parcels, airs, SKUs, containers, everything in one. So the solutions exist, as well as for not just the logistics visibility, but also for planning. This is an end-to-end planning where I'm looking at my channel, I'm looking at my supply, I'm looking at my demand, I'm looking at my promotions. So please, if you want to go digital, go for cloud and SaaS. I'm not saying this because I work for a cloud SaaS provider. I'm saying because a network like this is unbelievably hard to manage if you want to pull every single connection to an on-premise, right? If you're going to be the endpoint for all of these connections, it's a security nightmare, it's a support nightmare. There are mature cloud SaaS offerings from my company, from many other companies out there. Ask the analysts, they'll tell you. And I'll close with some practical calls to actions to inspire some people in the audience for this year or the next 5 years as you go through your transformation. Treat the internal collaboration with the same discipline and focus as your external collaboration. You're going to be pretty hard on your suppliers. Be as tough as that on your internal colleagues. Likewise, if you are providing a service in-house downstream and you're collaborating, strive to provide as good a service and experience to your internal customer as external. Just because they have the same logo as you on the business card doesn't mean that you can get sloppy. Be precise, be specific, right? And strive for high quality. If you're thinking of this is my process and this is their process, you are a risk at siloed thinking. If you are thinking of my KPI instead of our joint objective, you are at risk of siloed thinking. You're not in the network space. You're not collaborating. So align the objectives, align the interests. The interests match up. We're all trying to be successful in business. There's value in it for everyone. And last but not least, irrespective of whether it's inside your company or outside. So align interest and objective internally and externally. And last but not least, always think network, always think end-to-end, multi-tier across the silos. Thank you. I think I did that bang in the 20 minutes allotted and would be happy to go to questions.
Great, thank you, David. And this is Stephanie Krishnan here. I'm with the Logistics and Supply Chain Management Society, but also a member of one of those aforementioned analysts, IDC. And I'll be hosting the questions for today, for this session. So great presentation, David. Thank you very much. One of the questions that we have is, at the moment, we're seeing that the greatest success stories are coming from collaboration. Are the companies still resisting this? And how can businesses overcome this resistance?
Great questions. Unfortunately, the answer is yes, there are still companies resisting this. People, process, technology, right? People don't like to give up control, right? If I automate, if I collaborate, am I still needed? So there's a risk there. Process, well, if, collaboration means exposing what you are doing. You have to be more transparent. So you can't hide your failures. You can't hide your little wobbles, your mistakes. And lastly, it requires a technology investment. So those are the axes along which we see for years and still now resistance. The way to overcome those is definitely talk about objectives and alignments. It's like, dear Mr. Supplier, if you make a mistake, I will notice anyway, maybe later when it's a problem with me. So how about you warn me ahead of time of a disruption, and then we can jointly work on the problem. I get a better service and you will not get penalties from me. So open it up, think of collaboration and not coercion. I would say that's definitely where the success lies.
Definitely, and I think it's important to note that going from 0 to 40% of collaboration is you can't expect to go the full 100% to start with. Yes.
Pareto, wall to wall, right? 80-20. 20% of your suppliers, customers, logistics do 80% of your volume. We've got the stats. It's everywhere, every industry, every region.
Great. We have a question here about collaboration and sustainability. The question says, I often read about joint industry collaboration to ensure sustainability. How can we collaborate to enhance sustainability in customers and channels? Any good ideas or suggestions?
Ooh, that's a good one. Customers and channel altogether. If you're going to collaboration and especially the digital model, you always wind up with better efficiency, especially down in the channel. Where by default, the default behavior of the brand owner will be to stuff the channel. They always want to overstock lest they lose a sale because of missing on-shelf availability. If you manage to open up through collaboration, the visibility into those multi-tier distribution networks, and potentially apply machine learning, artificial intelligence prediction, you can be much leaner on your inventory and your expediting, right? You can ship by road rather than air, which has a much better carbon footprint. You can have less inventory, less excess and obsolete. And that definitely improves sustainability in terms of materials, in terms of energy. And the basis for that is digital, right? Is to have all of the data. How do we get the data? Collaboration with the multi-tier partners in the downstream.
Yes, absolutely. Now we do have Sanjay who will be asking a live question. Sanjay, are you ready? One moment.
Can you hear me,
Sanjay?
Stephanie?
Yes, we can.
Yep,
Thank you.
Lovely. Good afternoon, David. Thank you so much for a lovely and a very practical session today. Thanks a lot. Great knowledge today. Collaboration for me, and interesting, you talked about CPFR, and I was actually responsible in introducing CPFR in 2 or 3 companies that I work for. What I realized from that experience was it's all about risk and reward, because more than 2 people work together, it's all about risk and reward, right? Whether your rewards and whether your risk, whether it's sub-optimization of your KPI or mine. And the second thing I realized was culture and trust. Now, how do I find a balance between the culture and the trust, given the the intercorporations have, or a wider kind of a scope that you have? How do I make that balance of achieving risk and reward for both the party, ending up into a win-win solution? Thank you.
Great question. So first, it's an evolution, right? You can't slam collaboration and dictate it. Don't think of it as a process change. Talk business, right? Don't think of it about an order or this and that. Think about what are we trying to achieve together. Speak the language that the business understands, and recognize that both sides have valid objectives, right? The consumer wants the best quality at the lowest price. The supplier wants the highest price and the best margin. Get that out into the open, transparency at that level, and then work out how to align that. Then, of course, you have to escort the change. That's where we see a lot of the failure. The people, you need to escort them, bring them along, explain. And last but not least, if I go back to my screenshots here, these KPIs at the top, these should be shared, right? So my revenue target, that's what my employees are going to see when they plan the channel with a dashboard like this. Put exactly that target onto your next partner downstream and potentially your next partner upstream, and why the heck not your logistics partner. Get everybody looking at that number and say, we as a network, as a CPFR multi-enterprise group, are working to make this target happen. We will expose all the good news and the bad news around this number to all of the parties, and so that everybody can see where things are going well and where extra work is needed, rather than hiding behind the siloed walls and just throwing out some commands where the other side doesn't understand where this came from, what the purpose of a command is. So align the objectives, align the incentives, align the measurements, and do proper change management. I suspect the change management around the people has cost you many sleepless nights if you've introduced CPFR in multiple companies.
Great, thank you, David. Now we have one last question, and this is coming from Alana Lee. Will the MES and QMS systems replace or integrate back to the ERP systems? And I think this is in reference to your Infineon project.
So they can, right? And you've got 2 ways of doing it. You do it in-house, so that's what many semiconductor companies have done, and it gets very difficult. It's an M&A rich space. It's a very fast moving space. So trying to catch up that integration manually, with doing your own internal IT developments is absolutely possible, but is very difficult. And there are cloud solutions exactly like E2 Open. So that solution which I showed, which we got the award for, we've been doing it for 20 years, and we have AMD and NVIDIA and you name them. We have them all, Bosch Semiconductors. In fact, yesterday we won one which I can't name yet, the press release will come soon, who has a big presence in Singapore as well, where we offer exactly that cloud service. We connect to all of these very different MES and QMS. We assemble this massive data, we hold it, we tidy it up, and give that tiny little drop of insight back to the ERP, because the ERP doesn't care about lots, batches, yields, anything like that. It just wants to know is my microchip order going to be fulfilled on time? So doing it directly back into the ERP, that's not going to happen. Building a layer in between yourself is possible, but expensive and very hard to maintain if you look at multi-year, multi-decade investments. And there are cloud solutions, very few, including ours, which can provide this service.
Fabulous. And I think we just have time to sneak one more in. It's going to be 1 minute. How does the joint collaboration challenges impact the success of supply chain digital transformation strategies? And I think this is looking at the across the supply chain, yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if you're not doing collaboration, you are not going to get to a digital supply chain. It is the foundation block. Is if you can't do this, right, if you don't have a road, you cannot work out a truck fleet optimization. It is the absolute foundation. It doesn't have to be everywhere day one. You can evolve as you go. But if you're not collaborating, your digital transformation will not succeed. At the very least, because once you've got a digital integrated planning, you need to get that new, very fast daily plan back into your supply chain network. Collaboration digital is the way to do that. Yeah, there's just no choice.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation today, David.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Have a wonderful morning. And thanks for dialing in from Germany. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.